Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. This time we're going to delve into the wizarding world of Harry Potter, and we aim to look at all of the games in the main series, which of course spanned many generations of consoles over the years. And of course, they're still making new ones today with the super anticipated Hogwarts Legacy on the near horizon. Grab your wands and broomsticks, let's check out some Harry Potter games. Okay, the first in the series is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and so I'm starting here as well, and I'm playing the PlayStation 1 version. The story dances around the same plot of the first book and movie where it hits the big parts, but often gets there from some other plot point unique to the game. A good example of this would be where the scene where Harry gets to be picked to be Seeker for Gryffindor by breaking the rules and trying to save the Remember-All for Neville. This happens still in the game, but you're not in class and there's a race scene with Malfoy where McGonagall randomly shows up afterward out on the school grounds. There's a lot of these kind of changes that move the big plot points forward.
Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts and Head of Gryffindor House. Although I do not approve of your chasing Malfoy about, I'll admit you have remarkable talent on a broomstick. Ordinarily, first-year students may not compete in Quidditch. In your case, we might overlook that rule. Hurry along to the Quidditch pitch. Your first match against Hufflepuff is about to start.
Well, that escalated quick. The game is a 3D platformer, and many of the tasks involve you having to run around the sprawling castle and complete platforming jumps and solve easy puzzles. The jumping is lacking really any difficulty, as it will automatically jump for you when you move off any ledge. The controls in general are surprisingly good, and it's not often that the automatic jumps will steer you wrong. Given the younger audience, I'd imagine this made it considerably more accessible, which is great. Being a third-person game, though, on the PS1, I had my concerns about the camera, which was so often an issue with these early 3D games, but I'm happy to report very minimal issues there. Your goal, like the original story, is to uncover the secret of what had been stolen from the Gringotts Bank, and make your way to do that by slowly unlocking all the pathways of the castle, and it's no short order, as there's tons of rooms and paths. It's impressive the size of the environments actually, and the design was good in that I rarely got turned around or confused as to where I wanted to go, which could have been easily the case given the size. To unlock new areas, you need to learn new spells and progress the overall story. You'll need to attend classes, and each of the recognizable ones are here along with the respective teacher. In classes, you have a rhythm-pressing puzzle to complete to master the spell, followed by a small trial to complete, which usually includes obviously the usage of that newly earned spell.
That was good. Excellent. Perfect. Watch out for this one.
Thankfully, you're not memorizing a spell book here, and inputs are relatively easy to use, and the game uses the context of the object or enemy to know which spell to cast. You could argue that this is overly simplified, but I think it makes sense for the target audience again and avoids anything tedious.
Well done! 5 points to Gryffindor.
Of course, you'll get a broomstick in your travels and be forced on multiple occasions to partake in flying, whether it's a race or to help out your team win their Quidditch match. The controls here are a bit too sensitive, and while they let you invert the controls, thankfully, I would have loved to have it turn down the left to right sensitivity as well, and it's just too easy to oversteer in those directions. There is some light combat in the form of mini-bosses, which could have included throwing things back at Malfoy and his Slytherin gang, or enemies summoned by you-know-who. These are generally easy, and they often provide plenty of health refills. If you do die, however, the game is very generous about where you restart, and never have a big time loss as a result.
Flipendo! 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 Flipendo!
The graphics are on the poor side, even for the PlayStation, and you have a lot of warping textures as well, which was another common problem with the early PS1 games. While the environments are likely the best looking modeling-wise, the characters stand out as the weakest linked. There is some impressive voice acting to go along with those, though, and the lines of the dialogue that are spoken, most of the actors did a good job, though it's not without an exception or two.
My name is Nearly Headless Nick, and I am the Gryffindor House Ghost. Look how tall this room is. Well, I mean, you must go all the way to the top to get out. If you want to look around, press your triangle button.
Overall, the game would have been a great way to pass the time between the books or movies and further explore the castle and its universe. Today, it's likely not worth returning to unless you have some deeper nostalgia, as the story isn't providing anything truly new, and despite a lower runtime of about 5 or so hours, it overstays its welcome by a bit by the midway point. Let's check out the next installment in the story next.
Well done. 5 points for Gryffindor.
Here's Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and I've moved on to the Game Boy Advance this time. Obviously, the graphic style would need to be changed from the platform that it's on, but what really surprised me out of the gate was the overall graphics quality. While it was a bit of a letdown on the PlayStation, here the graphics are bright and have a good fidelity for the system. The cutscenes are equally nice, and while we've lost the voice acting with no surprise, the quality more than makes up for the swap. The game plays out in an isometric view, and so the camera never becomes an issue outside of just generally a smaller screen port that doesn't quite jive with some of the sizes of the rooms, which will force you to explore the corners of each to really make sure that you've seen all of it, which can get a bit tedious. Unlike the last game, there is a jump button here, and while there's not a ton of platforming puzzles, where there are, it's unfortunately overused, especially with the isometric view that can always add to the difficulty when landing on smaller platforms. Thankfully, the physics seem good, and it's not really a deal breaker. The format of the game follows close to that of the previous installment, where you attend classes, explore the castle and surrounding areas, learn new spells, and all while progressing the general plot of the story, where again the game takes some liberties but nails the major scenes. The castle is easier to traverse this time around, and I prefer the overall presentation here, even if it's not as immersive of what you can achieve in 3D. The quests are easy to follow, but there's a ton of back and forth. When you make your way to the end of a dungeon, it sends you back through instead of just assuming that you made it back out, and this really adds to the unnecessary runtime. What also adds to the game length is the choice of what they included. Before you even get to Hogwarts, you need to experience Diagon Alley, buy your supplies, help Neville find his toad, which wasn't even in the books or movies, and just more tedious things. And what I don't understand is why these had to be in here. Like I mentioned, you'll expand your spellbook, but this time around, you'll get to manually select which spell you have equipped to perform various activities. While it adds some more difficulty to the puzzles by having to know which spell for which application is required, there's a lot of switching back and forth, which requires pausing the game and performing some menuing each time that gets old quickly. Flying, of course, is still here, and again you'll be flying through rings to catch various things on your broomstick. The flight controls are a bit better on this game, but I still found it difficult to hit all the rings. Perhaps I'm just not that cut out for flying. Final thoughts on this one though is that it's a solid improvement over the last game on almost all sides. It's still too long for its own good with plenty of room for more improvement. So let's keep going through the series and move on with the next game. Okay, here's Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban on the Nintendo GameCube.
A Dementor. One of the Dementors of Azkaban.
Are you sure you're okay, Harry?
Fine. Take this book, Harry. I'm sure it'll help.
It has a few pages.
Now we see a big jump in terms of graphics, which isn't all that surprising considering the hardware progression we've made. This newest installment has some interesting changes to cover, and the best one is that you can now switch between Harry, Ron, and Hermione in real time with the click of a button. This will often be required to solve puzzles that have multiple phases or puzzles that require specific skill sets. Ron, for example, can find false walls, which apparently is a Weasley trait. I don't know. And Hermione can sneak under small gaps. The puzzles are magnified with this game, and while the previous two had a lot of puzzles, you get an onslaught of them here, most of which have multiple phases. While none of them are particularly hard, sometimes it's confusing to know just how to interact versus being challenging to solve once you can. After you complete a puzzle, it's not uncommon to be tasked with another one immediately afterwards, which can get a bit boring as they're not typically all that satisfying to solve in some cases. Another nice addition though is that there's boss fights, which can go beyond just a simple duel. These larger fights are fun and provide a better sense of accomplishment than what the previous installments gave. In the place of broomsticks and Quidditch, you get to ride the Hippogriff Buckbeak, though the controls are about as responsive as the last few games. There are times where you will get to control Hedwig the Owl, which can be used as the same control mechanisms, and I often find that I'm just blundering my way through these scenes and banging into walls. Thankfully, there's not a ton of parts here that include these, though they do get to mix up the gameplay well enough. The layout of the castle is the best thus far, and they really captured the essence of what you see in the movies better than any of the previous installments. You can ride Buckbeak around the outside of the castle if you're interested in seeing the outside views, and despite some inconsistency with scale, it's a nice experience. Since we're back on a major platform, the voice acting is back, and while not all actors strive to hit their big screen equivalents, the ones that do get it close. Since you now explore the castle as a trio, there's playful banter between the two non-controlled characters, which also adds some nice immersion to the gameplay. The overall flow is very similar, where you need to attend classes which earn you new spells, all while progressing the larger plot. The spells come from spellbooks like the last game, and then are usually incorporated into puzzles from there on out. Each character will learn different spells, which further emphasizes the need to switch between them to work together in solving puzzles. The story is a bit strange, and the game takes the most liberty with the story, often adding things that just don't have anything to do with the original. For the big plot points that are in the original material, they usually only play out in the cutscenes and not actually experienced as a player, which I felt was an odd choice to say the least. One last thing that I'll mention is that I think they actually got the runtime better on this game, as it's shorter when compared with the other games, and that feels right. I still think that there's too much time chewed up on some of the endlessness of the puzzles, but it still paces best thus far. They added the ability to play as unique characters, which was a big plus, and the best implementation to our list at this point. Let's keep moving though, on to the next game. It's hard to believe we're already on the 4th game. This is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire for the PSP. We take a bit of a dramatic turn in terms of gameplay with this installment, as you won't be walking around the castle anymore. Instead, you'll be selecting your stage from a pensieve and watching the opening cutscene for it. Before each stage, you select from Harry, Ron, or Hermione, as you won't be hot swapping them like last game, though the other 2 characters that you didn't pick will still follow you around helping. There's not much in the way of puzzles, at least not like in the previous games. You'll still be grabbing and moving things around, but it's a little bit more action than puzzle orientated. The graphics are pretty good for the PSP, though there are some significant frame rate issues going on as well, as the controls that just didn't feel like they were as tight as they should be. Each of your face buttons will provide a different spell, but basically boil down to Accio on the triangle to fetch you pickups like beans, the X button will be a Jinx attack, and the square button will be a context-aware spell like water for putting out fire, for instance, or a plant spell for growing a convenient lily pad to walk on. The circle button is dedicated to an overdrive mode that requires you to build up the meter, which is in the upper right-hand corner before being available. There's no real platforming, as again there's no jumping, neither with or without a dedicated button. Most stages have branching paths with multiple Tri-Wizard shields, which will end the stage.
Carpe retract!
The gillyweed!
Great! Yeah!
These are your goal to collect in each. Collecting these shields will unlock more stages, which can provide you with a new spell that lets you go back, Metroidvania style, to collect some previously inaccessible shield. When you kill enemies or interact with various objects in a stage, they'll typically drop beans to collect, and there's where the Accio spell really becomes useful. You'll use these beans to buy upgrade cards for each of the characters, which you can then customize and equip before you start a stage. This was a very welcome change, and while it isn't a complete game changer for the gameplay, it was a fun mix to add to the game, and it's really great to optimize each character. The story follows the book and movies well enough, and thankfully you'll play rather than watch the Tri-Wizard challenges. Here you can see the first with the dragon, where you need to fly through Hogwarts and its surroundings, trying to survive the beast and collect beans and go fast. I'm happy to report that the flying controls are definitely improved, and it was a fun mix to the gameplay. Overall, this game is the shortest game thus far, but since the others kind of dragged on, that's not a bad thing. The cutscenes are great, and the story matched your expectation, and outside of some performance issues, this one really stood out to me in a good way. Alright, and there we have it. The first of all main series Harry Potter games. There was some great variety amongst the bunch, and I really enjoyed that, along with the puzzle elements from The Prisoner of Azkaban. I didn't know what to expect, as this was my first time playing any of them, so I didn't really have nostalgia guiding my enjoyment. Which ones have you all played and enjoyed the most? Let me know down in the comments below. Of course, next time we're going to be moving right along with the remaining games in this series, which ups the ante in terms of console hardware, which of course will be interesting. So until then, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.